Tommy's hands shook as he dismounted, his boots hitting the canyon floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo forever in the oppressive silence. Patches whinnied again, backing away from the scene, but Tommy forced himself forward, the metallic smell of blood mixed with the dust and sage, making his stomach churn. Iron Sam's eyes fluttered open as Tommy approached, and for a moment the boy wondered if he was looking at a ghost. Everyone in Clearwater Ridge knew the stories about Samuel Mackenzie, how he could break a wild stallion with nothing but his voice, how he'd never lost a horse to rustlers or coyotes, how men twice his size stepped aside when he walked down Main Street. But the man pinned beneath the massive black stallion looked smaller somehow, more fragile than the legend. "Boy," Mackenzie wheezed, his weathered face twisted in pain. You're Jacob's grandson, got his eyes." Tommy crept closer, keeping one eye on the stallion. The horse was still alive but laboring, its breathing shallow and rapid. "Mister, I need to get help. No time." Mackenzie's hand shot out with surprising speed, grabbing Tommy's wrist with iron fingers. "Listen close, boy. In my vest pocket, there's a compass. Take it." Tommy hesitated. Ma had taught him never to take things from strangers, and stealing from a dying man seemed like the kind of sin that would follow you straight to hell. But something in Mackenzie's eyes, a desperate urgency that made Tommy's skin crawl, made him reach into the blood-stained vest. His fingers closed around something cold and smooth. When he pulled it out, Tommy frowned. It looked like a compass, but the needle spun wildly before pointing toward a direction that made no sense. According to this compass, north was somewhere deep in the canyon wall. "That's not pointing right," Tommy said. Mackenzie's laugh turned into a cough that brought up blood. "Depends on what you're trying to find, boy. Your grandfather, he carried one just like it, before he disappeared into the hidden valley. My grandpa died in a riding accident, Ma told me." "Your ma told you what she needed to tell you." Mackenzie's grip tightened. "But Jacob Clearwater didn't die, boy. He found the valley, found the silver mare, and now she's calling again." The stallion shuddered and went still. In the sudden silence, Tommy could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs. "You're talking crazy, mister. The heat's got you all turned around." "Am I?" Mackenzie struggled to sit up straighter, and Tommy saw something else in the man's vest, a photograph, old and yellowed at the edges. Mackenzie pulled it out with trembling fingers. "Look." Tommy stared at the photograph and felt the world tilt sideways. It showed a man who looked exactly like his pa, only dressed in clothes from long ago, standing next to a horse so pale it seemed to glow against the dark canyon backdrop. But it was the man's face that made Tommy's blood run cold. Those were his own eyes looking back at him, his own stubborn chin, his own unruly cowlick. "That's your grandfather," Mackenzie whispered, "taken the day before he rode into Devil's Canyon and never came back. Least, not in any way folks would understand." Tommy's mouth went dry. Where did you get this?" "He gave it to me. 20 years ago, when he came back to warn me. Said the valley was calling, said the silver mare needed a rider, said his bloodline would be back when the time was right." Mackenzie's eyes fixed on Tommy with an intensity that made the boy want to run. "You feel it, don't you? The pull. That's why you're out here alone, why you came down into the canyon instead of staying on the safe trails." Tommy wanted to deny it, but the word stuck in his throat. He had felt something, a strange tugging sensation that had led him off the main path and down into Devil's Canyon for the first time in his life. Ma had always forbidden him from exploring the canyon, said it was dangerous, full of loose rocks and hidden drop-offs. But this morning, something had called to him from the red rock depths. "Take the compass," Mackenzie said, his voice growing weaker. "Keep it secret. When you're older, when you're ready, it'll show you the way to the hidden valley. But boy..." His grip on Tommy's wrist became painful. "Don't go looking before you're ready. The silver mare doesn't take kindly to those who aren't worthy." "I don't understand any of this," Tommy said, but he pocketed the compass anyway. Mackenzie smiled, and for a moment his face looked peaceful. "You will, boy. When the time comes, you will. The old rancher's eyes closed, and his hand fell away from Tommy's wrist. In the sudden stillness, Tommy could hear nothing but the wind whistling through the canyon walls and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. He was alone with a dead man, a dead horse, and a compass that pointed toward impossible things. And somewhere deep in his chest, something was beginning to pull. The ordinary world. Tommy sat frozen beside Mackenzie's still form for what felt like hours, though the sun had barely moved across the canyon rim. The compass felt like a burning coal in his pocket, and every few seconds he caught himself glancing toward the canyon wall, where it claimed north lay hidden. The pull Mackenzie had spoken of thrummed beneath his ribs like a second heartbeat, but stronger now, more insistent. Patches whickered nervously from where he'd retreated up the canyon slope, and the sound snapped Tommy back to the terrible reality before him. Dead man, dead horse, and him with no explanation that wouldn't get him skinned alive. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his bloody hands on his jeans. Ma would tan his hide for getting blood on his good clothes, but that seemed like the least of his troubles now. Think, he told himself. Think like Pa would. The story came to him as he climbed back up to Patches. He'd found Mackenzie already dead, pinned under his horse. Looked like the stallion had spooked, maybe at a rattler, and thrown his rider into the rocks. Tragic accident. Happened all the time in the canyon country. No mention of mysterious compasses or silver mares or grandfathers who weren't really dead. Tommy mounted Patches and urged him toward home, but found himself looking back over his shoulder 3 times before they cleared the canyon rim. Each time, the pull in his chest grew stronger, like fishing line being reeled in slow. The Clearwater Ranch sprawled across a valley that had been green as emeralds in his grandfather's time, or so Pa always said. Now, after 3 years of drought, it looked like God's own skillet, brown grass crackling underfoot, dust devils dancing between the buildings and the creek, running so low Tommy could hop across it on stepping stones his own boots had worn smooth. He could see Ma hanging laundry behind the main house, white sheets snapping like surrender flags in the hot wind. Pa would be in the north pasture, checking on the cattle that grew skinnier each week. His older sister Beth would be in town with her friends, spending the summer before her senior year pretending she was already grown and gone from this place. This place. Tommy had never thought of the ranch as something to escape from before, but now, with Mackenzie's words echoing in his head and that impossible compass weighing down his pocket, he found himself seeing it differently. The weathered fence posts that needed replacing, the barn roof with its missing shingles, the way Pa's shoulders had started to hunch forward like he was carrying something too heavy to set down. They were barely hanging on. Tommy knew it, even if nobody said it out loud. Heard Pa and Ma talking in low voices after they thought he was asleep, words like bank and foreclosure, and maybe we should consider Frank's offer. Frank Morrison owned the spread next to theirs and had been circling like a buzzard for 2 years now, making increasingly generous offers for land that had been in the Clearwater family for 3 generations. Tommy. Ma's voice carried across the yard as he approached the house. Where have you been? You missed your chores this morning. He dismounted and led Patches toward the barn, trying to keep his expression neutral. Just riding, Ma. Lost track of time. Sarah Clearwater emerged from behind the sheets, clothespins bristling from her mouth like porcupine quills. At 34, she still had the trim figure that had caught his father's eye, but 3 years of drought had carved worry lines around her green eyes and pulled her brown hair back in a severe bun that seemed to grow tighter each month. Lost track of time, she repeated, removing the clothespins. Tommy, we've talked about this. Every hand needs to pull its weight around here, even small ones. The chickens are squawking up a storm, and the horses need fresh water. Yes, ma'am. He paused, the lie ready on his tongue. Ma? I saw something in Devil's Canyon today. Looked like maybe a horse and rider went down. Her face went pale so fast Tommy thought she might faint. You were in Devil's Canyon? Thomas Clearwater, what have I told you about? I know, I didn't go down into it. Just saw from the rim. The words came easier now. Might want to tell Pa, in case someone's family is looking. Ma stared at him for a long moment, and Tommy had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through his skull to the secrets hiding inside. Finally, she nodded. "I'll tell your father when he comes in. And Tommy, you stay out of that canyon. Nothing good has ever come from Devil's Canyon. Nothing." She turned back to the laundry, but not before Tommy caught something in her expression. Fear, yes, but something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. The compass seemed to pulse against his leg as he led Patches into the barn. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and distant storms that never seemed to arrive, and deep in his chest, that strange pulling sensation grew stronger, tugging him toward mysteries he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. But wanted to or not, Tommy Clearwater was beginning to understand that some mysteries wouldn't wait for permission. The call to adventure. Tommy had just finished watering the horses when he heard the sound of hoofbeats thundering up the ranch road. Multiple riders coming fast. He peered through the barn doors and felt his stomach drop to his boots. Sheriff Dunmore led the group, his silver star catching the afternoon sun like a warning signal. Behind him rode Doc Patterson, Frank Morrison, and 3 other men Tommy recognized from town. Their faces were grim, purposeful, and they were heading straight for the house. The compass in Tommy's pocket seemed to grow heavier as he watched his father emerge from the corral, wiping his hands on a rag. Pa's weathered face showed no surprise, only the careful neutrality he wore when dealing with trouble that might bite back. "Afternoon, Jim," Sheriff Dunmore called out, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. "We need to talk." Tommy crept closer to the barn door, staying in the shadows. His mother appeared on the porch, drying her hands on her apron, and he could see the tension in her shoulders even from this distance. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Pa asked. "Samuel Mackenzie's missing," Dunmore said without preamble. "Horse came back to his place this morning. No rider. Blood on the saddle. We're organizing search parties." Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs. The compass felt like it was burning through his pocket, and that strange pulling sensation in his chest suddenly intensified, making it hard to breathe. Frank Morrison stepped forward, his expensive hat shading a face that managed to look concerned and calculating at the same time. "Jim, I hate to bring this up at a time like this, but someone mentioned seeing your boy out near Devil's Canyon this morning." The silence that followed was so complete, Tommy could hear a horsefly buzzing against the barn window 30 feet away. His father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his mother's knuckles went white where she gripped the porch railing. "Tommy," Pa called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made disobedience unthinkable. "Come here, son." Tommy's legs felt like they were made of wet rope, but he forced himself to walk out of the barn and across the dusty yard. 6 pairs of adult eyes tracked his movement, and he could feel the weight of their collective attention like a physical thing pressing down on his shoulders. "Tell the sheriff what you told your mother," Pa said. Tommy swallowed hard, acutely aware of the compass against his leg and the photograph of his grandfather hidden beneath it. "I saw something in Devil's Canyon today. From the rim. Looked like maybe a horse and rider went down." Sheriff Dunmore knelt down to Tommy's eye level, his weathered face serious but not unkind. "You're sure about this, son? Devil's Canyon's a dangerous place. Not somewhere folks usually ride." "Yes, sir. I was up on Lookout Ridge, and I saw something dark at the bottom. Could have been a horse." Doc Patterson, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, shook his head grimly. "If Sam went down in that canyon, we might not get him out alive. Those walls are near vertical in places." "We have to try," Dunmore said, standing up. "Jim, I need every able-bodied man. Can you spare the time?" Tommy watched his father's face, saw the conflict there. They had their own troubles, their own work that couldn't wait. But this was Mackenzie, Iron Sam, who'd helped every rancher in the county at one time or another. "Of course," Pa said. "Tommy, you'll stay here with your mother. No exceptions." "But Pa—" "No exceptions," his father repeated, and his tone brooked no argument. As the men prepared to ride out, Frank Morrison lingered behind, approaching Tommy's parents with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Sarah, Jim," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I know this isn't the time, but with everything that's happening, if you folks ever decide you want to take me up on my offer, it stands. This drought's got everyone spooked, and Devil's Canyon's got a bad reputation for good reason. Tommy saw his parents exchange a look. Quick, worried, full of unspoken communication. "We'll keep that in mind, Frank," Ma said carefully. Morrison nodded and mounted his horse. "You do that." "And Tommy," he added, looking down at the boy with eyes that seemed to see too much, "you stay away from that canyon. Some places aren't meant for children." As the search party thundered away in a cloud of dust, Tommy stood in the yard with his parents, feeling the weight of secrets pressing against his chest. The compass pulsed against his leg like a living thing, and somewhere in the distance, he could swear he heard the sound of hoofbeats that belonged to no earthly horse. His mother's hand fell on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw fear in her green eyes. "Tommy," she whispered, "what aren't you telling us?" Tommy's mouth went dry as his mother's green eyes bore into him, searching for the truth he couldn't give. The compass felt like it was burning a hole through his pocket, and Mackenzie's final words echoed in his head, "Keep it secret." But standing there, under Ma's worried gaze, with the dust from the search party still settling around them, Tommy felt like the worst kind of liar. "Nothing, Ma," he managed, the words scraping against his throat like sandpaper. "I told you what I saw." She studied his face for a long moment, and Tommy had to fight the urge to squirm. His mother had always been able to read him like one of her recipe books, every ingredient laid out plain as day, but this time he held her stare, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "Come inside," she said finally. "Both of you. Your father will want coffee when he gets back, and Lord knows when that'll be." Tommy followed his parents into the kitchen, the familiar smells of biscuits and coffee doing nothing to settle his churning stomach. He slumped into his usual chair at the scarred wooden table, watching Ma busy herself with the coffee pot, while Pa stood by the window, staring out toward Devil's Canyon. "Jim," Ma said quietly, "what if they find him? What if Sam's really down there?" Pa's shoulders sagged slightly. "Then we'll bring him home, Sarah. Dead or alive." The word dead hit Tommy like a physical blow. Mackenzie was dead, had died right there in Tommy's arms while talking about silver mares and hidden valleys and grandfathers who weren't really gone. The boy's chest tightened as he imagined the search party finding the old rancher's body, asking questions Tommy couldn't answer without revealing secrets that felt too big and dangerous for an 8-year-old to carry. What if they could tell Mackenzie hadn't died from the fall? What if they found evidence that someone had been there before them? Tommy's hands grew clammy as he realized he might have left tracks, disturbed something that would give him away. But worse than the fear of getting caught was the growing certainty that Mackenzie's death was just the beginning. The compass in his pocket seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, and that strange pulling sensation in his chest had grown stronger since he'd returned home. It tugged at him now, insistent as a fishing line, drawing his attention toward the canyon even as he sat in the safety of his family's kitchen. "The silver mare doesn't take kindly to those who aren't worthy," Mackenzie had said. What did that mean? And what about the photograph of his grandfather, the man who supposedly died in a riding accident but who Mackenzie claimed had found some hidden valley? Tommy's head spun with questions he couldn't ask and answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. "Tommy!" His father's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Pa had turned from the window and was studying him with the same intensity Ma had shown outside. "You're certain about what you saw? Think hard, son. A man's life might depend on it." The irony of it nearly choked him. Mackenzie's life was already gone, but here was Pa asking him to be certain, to think hard, to tell the truth that would help save a dead man. Tommy wanted to confess everything, wanted to pull out the compass and the photograph and spill the whole impossible story across the kitchen table like a handful of scattered beans. But then he remembered Mackenzie's iron grip on his wrist, the desperate urgency in the old rancher's eyes. Keep it secret. Some truths, Tommy was beginning to understand, were too dangerous to share, even with family, maybe especially with family. "I'm certain, Pa," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "I saw something down in the canyon." Pa nodded slowly, but his eyes remained troubled. "All right then. But Tommy, I want you to stay close to the house until this is settled. No riding out alone, no exploring. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. But even as Tommy said the words, he could feel that mysterious pull growing stronger, tugging him toward the canyon with an insistence that made his bones ache. Whatever Mackenzie had given him, whatever legacy he'd inherited from a grandfather he'd never really known, it wasn't going to let him rest in the safety of his family's kitchen. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink toward the western hills, painting the sky the color of dried blood. Soon, the search party would find Mackenzie's body, and then the real questions would begin. Questions Tommy couldn't answer without revealing secrets that felt bigger and more dangerous than anything an 8-year-old should have to carry. He pressed his hand against the compass through his pocket and felt its impossible needle spinning, pointing toward mysteries hidden in canyon walls and truths that might be too terrible to face. But ready or not, Tommy Clearwater was beginning to understand that some mysteries wouldn't wait for permission or for courage. The pull came strongest in the deep hours before dawn, when the house settled into its quietest creaks and the desert wind whispered secrets through the eaves. Tommy lay rigid in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while the compass seemed to pulse against his nightstand like a living heart. 3 days had passed since the search party found Mackenzie's body. 3 days of watching his parents exchange worried glances and Sheriff Dunmore, asking careful questions that danced around truths Tommy couldn't speak. The official story had held. Tragic riding accident, horse spooked, man thrown against the rocks. Doc Patterson confirmed what everyone expected to hear, and Mackenzie was buried in the dusty cemetery behind the white-painted church, with half the county in attendance. Tommy had stood between his parents during the service, the compass burning in his Sunday jacket pocket while the preacher spoke about life's mysteries and God's unknowable plan. But the compass wouldn't let him rest. Each night it called to him stronger than the last, that invisible fishing line in his chest growing taut as a bowstring. Tonight, as thunder rumbled in the distance without bringing rain, Tommy finally understood he couldn't fight it anymore. He slipped from his bed and dressed in the darkness, his hands moving with a steadiness that surprised him. Jeans, boots, his everyday shirt. The compass went into his front pocket along with a photograph of his grandfather that had become as familiar as his own reflection. In the kitchen, he wrapped leftover biscuits and jerky in a dish towel, filled his father's old canteen from the pump, and gathered supplies with the methodical precision of someone much older. Patches nickered softly when Tommy entered the barn, as if the pony had been expecting this moment. The tack went on smooth and quiet, leather familiar under Tommy's small fingers. He'd been saddling horses since he could barely reach the stirrups, and muscle memory served him now even as his mind reeled with the magnitude of what he was about to do. This wasn't exploring. This wasn't the usual childhood rebellion that earned him extra chores and stern lectures. This was leaving. Really leaving. Everything safe and known for something that pulled at him from beyond the edge of mapped country. The compass had shown him impossible things, a needle that pointed toward no earthly direction, a photograph of a grandfather who'd supposedly died, but whose eyes held secrets Tommy was only beginning to glimpse. He led Patches from the barn and mounted quietly, the familiar creak of leather lost in the wind's low moan. The ranch spread around him in shades of gray and deeper black. The house where his parents slept, the corrals where cattle waited for rain that never came, the fence posts that marked the boundaries of everything he'd ever known. Frank Morrison's lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the offer that hung over his family like a storm cloud. At the edge of the yard, Tommy paused and looked back one final time. The weight of what he was abandoning hit him like a physical blow, not just the safety of his bed and his mother's cooking, but the entire shape of the life he'd known. After tonight, whether he succeeded or failed in whatever impossible task lay ahead, nothing would be the same. The boy who'd discovered Mackenzie dying in Devil's Canyon had already started changing into something else, something the compass recognized, even if Tommy didn't understand it yet. The thunder rumbled closer now, and somewhere in its rolling voice, Tommy thought he heard hoofbeats that belonged to no earthly horse. He pressed his heels to Patch's sides and rode into the darkness, following the compass's impossible pull toward Devil's Canyon and the mysteries hidden in its depths. The ranch fell away behind him, swallowed by night and distance. Ahead lay country he'd never seen, valleys that didn't appear on any map, and truths that Mac Kenzie had died protecting. The invisible line in his chest grew stronger with each step, drawing him inexorably toward whatever waited in the hidden places beyond the canyon walls. Tommy Clearwater, 8 years old and terrified but unable to turn back, rode toward his destiny with a compass spinning wildly in his pocket and his grandfather's enigmatic photograph pressed against his heart. The wind carried scents of sage and something else, something wild and ancient that made Patch's ears prick forward and his step quicken despite the darkness. There was no going back now. The threshold had been crossed the moment he'd climbed into the saddle. But Tommy only truly understood it as the last familiar landmarks disappeared, and the compass began to glow with its own impossible light, pointing him toward mysteries that would either save his family's legacy or destroy everything he'd ever believed about the world. The thunder spoke again, and this time Tommy was certain he heard horses running. Silver horses under a moonless sky, heading for a hidden valley that existed beyond the boundaries of any known map. The thunder crashed overhead just as Patches stumbled, nearly sending Tommy tumbling from the saddle into the rocky darkness. The compass's glow had grown so bright it cast eerie shadows through the fabric of his pocket, and the pulling sensation in his chest had become so intense it felt like his ribs might crack from the pressure. They'd been riding for what felt like hours through country that shouldn't exist. The familiar landmarks of home had vanished completely, replaced by twisted rock formations and stunted trees that looked like they'd been carved from nightmare. The very air tasted different here, metallic and sharp, with an underlying sweetness that made Tommy's head swim. "Easy, boy," he whispered to Patches, patting the pony's neck. But his mount's ears were pinned back in nervous confusion, and Tommy could feel the animal's tension through the saddle. They were both lost now, following nothing but the compass's impossible guidance into territory that belonged on no map. That's when Tommy heard the voice. "You're not supposed to be here, boy." He yanked on the reins so hard that Patches reared, and Tommy had to grab the saddle horn to keep from falling. A figure materialized from behind a boulder, an old woman bent with age, her long grey hair hanging loose around shoulders wrapped in a blanket that seemed to shimmer in the compass's strange light. "Ma'am?" Tommy's voice cracked like a much younger child's. She stepped closer, and Tommy saw her eyes were the color of storm clouds, ancient and knowing. Her weathered face carried lines that spoke of decades spent under the desert sun, but there was something else there, a wildness that reminded Tommy of the mustangs his grandfather had supposedly tried to catch. "Elena Vega," she said, as if answering an unasked question. "And you're James Clearwater's grandson. I can see your grandfather in your face, boy. Same stubborn jaw, same fool eyes that see too much for their own good." Tommy's hand instinctively moved to his pocket, where the photograph rested beneath the glowing compass. "You knew my grandfather?" The old woman's laugh was like wind through dry grass. "Knew him, child. I buried him when the silver mare was done with him, just like I buried Samuel Mac Kenzie 3 days past, though I see you already know about that. But—" Tommy's head spun. Mac Kenzie was buried in town. I was at the funeral. "What they buried was meat and bones," Elena said dismissively. "The man himself came through here same as you're doing now, following that cursed compass toward answers he wasn't strong enough to handle. Same as your grandfather before him." The thunder rolled again, closer now, and with it came the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, not the solid clip-clop of earthly horses, but something lighter, more musical. Tommy's spine prickled as the sound grew louder. "She's coming," Elena said, and for the first time, Tommy heard fear in her voice. The silver mare doesn't like to be kept waiting, especially by children who steal what doesn't belong to them. "I didn't steal anything," Tommy protested, even as his hand tightened around the compass. "Mac Kenzie gave it to me." "Samuel Mac Kenzie was dying and desperate," Elena shot back. "He passed a burden to you that's killed every man who's carried it. Your grandfather tried to find the hidden valley, tried to claim the mare for his own bloodline. You know what he found instead? The hoofbeats were almost upon them now, and the air itself seemed to shimmer and bend. Tommy could smell something wild and electric, like lightning and mint and something else he couldn't name. "What?" he whispered. Elena's storm-grey eyes fixed on his. "He found out some doors shouldn't be open, boy. Some trails lead places you can't come back from. That compass isn't a gift, it's a test, and most who take it fail." The silver mare stepped into the compass's glow like moonlight given form. She was impossibly beautiful and utterly terrifying, her coat shimmering with its own inner radiance, her eyes deep as eternity. When she looked at Tommy, he felt as though she could see through his skin to the very core of his soul. "Why have you come?" The voice spoke inside his head, musical and commanding. Tommy's mouth went dry, but somehow he found words. "To learn the truth about my grandfather, about the hidden valley." The mare moved closer, her hooves making no sound on the rocky ground. "Truth has a price, young one. Are you prepared to pay it?" Elena grabbed Tommy's arm. "Don't answer yet, boy. Once you speak your intention to her, there's no taking it back. The trail you're on leads to power, yes, but also to sacrifice. Every man who's tried to claim the valley's secrets has lost something precious in return." The mare's eyes never left Tommy's face. "Choose quickly, descendant of Clearwater. Dawn comes, and with it, those who would use you for their own purposes." In the distance, Tommy could hear new sounds, men's voices, the thud of earthly hooves. Someone was following his trail. Tommy's heart hammered as the distant voices grew clearer. His father's voice calling his name, Sheriff Dunmore barking orders, the jangle of bits and spurs carried on the pre-dawn wind. They'd discovered his absence and tracked him into this impossible country where silver mares spoke in minds and compass needles pointed toward hidden valleys. "Choose now," the mare commanded, her mental voice growing urgent. "They bring iron thoughts and closed hearts. They will not understand what you have awakened." "Tommy!" His father's shout echoed off the twisted rocks, closer than before. "Tommy, where are you?" Elena's grip tightened on his arm. "If you go back with them now, boy, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. The compass will call to you until you're old and grey, and you'll never know peace. But if you answer her," she gestured toward the silver mare, "you step onto a path that swallowed stronger men than you." The mare snorted, her breath visible in the cold air like wisps of starlight. "Your bloodline carries the old bond, young one. Your grandfather felt it, as did the rancher Mackenzie. But feeling it and mastering it are different things entirely." "What happened to my grandfather?" Tommy whispered, needing to know before the search party found them. "Really happened?" Elena's ancient eyes reflected the mare's otherworldly glow. "He made it to the hidden valley. Saw wonders that would break most men's minds, horses that run between worlds, springs that show the future in their depths, grass that grows in colors that have no earthly names. But the valley demanded a choice, same as you face now." "Tell him," the mare commanded. He could claim the valley's power, bond with the silver herd, become something more than human, Elena continued. But the price was everything else, his family, his old life, his ability to return to the world of ordinary things. Or he could return home and forget, let the memory fade like a half-remembered dream. Tommy's throat tightened. What did he choose? "Neither," Elena said sadly. "He tried to take the power without paying the price, tried to bring a piece of the valley back with him. That's why they found his body broken at the canyon's bottom. The silver mare threw him down for his greed." The voices were getting dangerously close now. Tommy could hear Patches whinnying in response to the familiar sound of his father's horse. Soon the search party would round the bend and find them here in this impossible place with a creature that couldn't exist. "They will not see me," the mare assured him, reading his thoughts. "Nor will they see the old woman, unless she chooses to be seen. But they will see you, young Clearwater, and they will take you back to safety and small dreams." "I can't go back," Tommy realized, the words surprising him with their certainty. "Even if I wanted to. This thing inside me, this pull, it's not going away." Elena nodded grimly. "The bloodline gift doesn't sleep once it's awakened. You'll hear the silver herd calling for the rest of your days. Question is whether you'll be strong enough to answer without losing yourself." The mare stepped closer, her luminous coat rippling with colors that had no names. The choice must be yours alone, descendant. But know this: the hidden valley holds answers to questions your people have asked for generations. Why the droughts come, why the wild herds vanish, why some bloodlines carry the sight while others remain blind. Tommy! His father's voice cracked like a whip, filled with desperation and growing panic. Son, answer me. The boy's chest ached with the impossible weight of the decision. He could call out right now, let his father find him, return to the ranch and the familiar rhythms of cattle and chores and his mother's worried love. The search for answers would end, and he could try to bury the compass's strange call beneath layers of ordinary life. But Mackenzie's dying words echoed in his memory: some truths are too important to stay buried. And deeper than that, Tommy felt the pull of something ancient in his blood. A connection to mysteries that predated maps and fences and the careful boundaries of civilized life. The silver mare watched him with eyes like deep water, patient but expectant. Elena's weathered hand remained on his arm, anchoring him to this moment of impossible choice. And somewhere behind them, closing fast, came the voices of everyone who loved him enough to risk this strange country to bring him home. Dawn breaks soon, the mare warned. In daylight, the path to the valley closes. Choose, young Clearwater, choose what manner of man you will become. Tommy closed his eyes and felt his grandfather's blood singing in his veins, felt the compass pulse like a second heartbeat, felt the weight of secrets that had killed 2 men settling onto his 8-year-old shoulders like a mantle he was either worthy to wear or destined to be crushed beneath. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. I'm going with you, Tommy whispered to the silver mare, his voice barely audible above the wind. Whatever the price is, I have to know. Elena's weathered face creased with something between admiration and sorrow. Brave boy. Foolish but brave. The mare's eyes blazed with approval, and suddenly the world around them shifted like water. The twisted rocks melted away, replaced by a narrow canyon path that gleamed with the same impossible light as the compass. The very air shimmered, and Tommy felt Patches tense beneath him as reality bent and reformed. Follow, the mare commanded, wheeling away down the luminous trail. And do not look back, no matter what you hear. Behind them, Tommy's father's voice rose to a desperate shout. Tommy, please, son, if you can hear me. The boy's resolve nearly shattered at the raw pain in that voice. His father had never sounded so afraid, so broken. Tommy's hands trembled on the reins as every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to call out, to end his father's nightmare. But Elena was beside him now, her own ancient horse materializing from shadows. The path won't wait, she said firmly, and if you hesitate now, you'll never get another chance. The valley only opens once for each bloodline. Tommy pressed his heels to Patch's sides, and the pony stepped onto the glowing trail. The moment his hooves touched that otherworldly stone, the sounds of the search party began to fade, as if they were falling into a deep well. His father's voice became an echo, then a whisper, then silence. The canyon walls rose impossibly high on either side, carved with symbols that hurt Tommy's eyes to look at directly. The compass in his pocket had grown so hot it nearly burned through the fabric, its glow now visible even in the open air. With each step deeper into the passage, Tommy felt something fundamental shifting inside him, as if parts of his soul were being rewired for purposes he couldn't yet comprehend. The first test has already begun, Elena called softly. Do you feel it? The pull to turn back? Tommy nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Every fiber of his being screamed that he was making a terrible mistake, that an 8-year-old boy had no business walking paths meant for heroes or madmen. The weight of his family's worry pressed down on him like a physical thing. That's your human heart, Elena continued. The part that wants safety, predictability, the warm hearth and familiar bed. But there's another part, isn't there? The part that sings when it hears the silver mare's call? Yes. Tommy could feel it, a wild exhilaration that grew stronger with each step forward. Something in his blood recognized this place, welcomed it, even as his mind reeled with terror. The compass wasn't just guiding him anymore, It was harmonizing with something deep in his bones, like a tuning fork finding its perfect note. The passage began to widen, and ahead Tommy could see a soft golden light that had nothing to do with dawn. The silver mare moved through it like a creature born from starlight itself, her hooves leaving prints that glowed briefly before fading. "How many others have come this way?" Tommy managed to ask. Elena's smile was grim. "Fewer than you'd think. More than survived it. Your grandfather wasn't the first Clearwater to hear the call. Your bloodline has been trying to reach the hidden valley for 4 generations. But the path only opens in times of great need, when the balance between worlds grows thin." "What kind of balance?" "The drought, child. The dying of the wild herds. The way the land itself seems to be forgetting how to live." Elena gestured toward the golden light ahead. "The silver horses are guardians, keepers of something precious that's been slowly poisoned by men who see only profit in every blade of grass." The passage opened suddenly into a vast circular chamber carved from living rock. But it wasn't the space that stopped Tommy's breath. It was what filled it. The silver mare stood at the center of a pool that reflected not water, but pure light. And around the pool's edge, like something from a fever dream, grazed a herd of horses that defied every natural law Tommy had ever known. They were creatures of mist and moonbeam, their coats shifting between silver and gold and colors that existed beyond the spectrum of earthly light. Some appeared solid as stone, while others flickered like candle flames in a draught, and their eyes, every one of them turned to look at Tommy with intelligence that was ancient and utterly alien. "Welcome, young Clearwater." The silver mare's voice filled his mind. "Welcome to the heart of all mysteries." Tommy slid from Patch's back on legs that barely supported him. The compass in his pocket had grown so bright it cast his shadow in sharp relief against the cavern walls, and in that light he saw something that made his blood freeze. Scattered around the pool's edge lay bones, human bones, picked clean and white. Some still wore the tattered remnants of cowboy boots and belt buckles. The remains of men who had made it this far but no farther. Yes. The mare confirmed his horrified realization. "The final test claims many. Are you prepared to discover what your grandfather truly died for?" Tommy's world collapsed as the terrible truth hit him like a physical blow. His grandfather hadn't died in an accident. He'd been killed here, in this sacred place, his bones joining the grisly collection around the pool of light. The boy's knees buckled, and he fell hard onto the stone floor, the compass tumbling from his pocket to skitter across the cavern. The moment the compass left his possession, everything changed. The silver herd's eyes turned from welcoming to coldly hostile. The mare's mental voice, which had been guiding and almost gentle, became sharp as winter wind. "Foolish child. You carry the bloodline, but not the strength. Already you falter." Elena dismounted with urgent haste, her weathered face creased with alarm. "Boy, get up! Don't show weakness here, they'll tear you apart." But Tommy couldn't move. The weight of his mistake crashed over him in devastating waves. He'd abandoned his family, left his father screaming his name in desperate terror, all to chase a fantasy that was going to get him killed. 8 years old, and he'd thrown away everything that mattered for bones and fairy tales. The silver horses began to move, circling closer. Their hooves made no sound, but Tommy could feel their ancient judgment pressing down on him. One of them, a stallion whose coat shifted between starlight and shadow, lowered his massive head until his alien eyes were inches from Tommy's face. "Your grandfather at least had the courage to face his death standing," the stallion's voice carved through Tommy's mind like ice. "You kneel like prey." "I want to go home," Tommy whispered, the words torn from him like pieces of his soul. "Please, I just want to go home." "There is no path back," the mayor said coldly. "The passage closes at dawn. You chose this fate, young Clearwater. Now face it." Elena grabbed the boy's shoulders, trying to haul him upright. "Listen to me, Tommy. The test isn't about being fearless. It's about finding strength when you have none left. Your grandfather failed because he wanted power. But you came here for truth. Hold on to that." The compass lay on the stone floor between Tommy and the pool of light, its glow fading moment by moment. As it dimmed, Tommy felt something precious slipping away. Not just the strange magic that had brought him here, but something deeper. The sense that he could be more than just a frightened child lost in an adult world of secrets and pain. Through the cavern's entrance, he caught a glimpse of natural light beginning to creep across the sky. Dawn was coming, just as the mayor had warned. Soon the passage would seal, and he would be trapped here forever with the bones of men who had dreamed too large and died for their ambition. Patches whinnied softly, the familiar sound cutting through Tommy's despair. His pony, brave little Patches who had carried him faithfully through impossible country, stood watching with trusting brown eyes. The same trust his family had placed in him when they'd saved every penny to buy that pony. The same trust his father placed in him every day when he sent Tommy out to check the cattle or mend fence. He thought of his mother, probably awake now and discovering his empty bed. She would blame herself, would think she'd failed to protect her only child. His father would never forgive himself for not watching closer, not seeing the signs that Tommy was planning something desperate. The silver herd pressed closer, their otherworldly beauty terrible in the growing light. Tommy could see now that some of the bones scattered around the pool were small, children's bones. He wasn't the first young Clearwater to reach this place and find himself unequal to its demands. "The compass chooses its own time to pass on," the mayor said, her mental voice devoid of mercy. "It called to you because your bloodline carries the old debt. But carrying a burden and being worthy of it are different things entirely." Elena knelt beside Tommy, her storm-grey eyes fierce. "Look at me, boy. Your grandfather failed because he tried to take power that wasn't his to claim. Mackenzie failed because he thought courage alone was enough. But you might be different. The compass came to you when you were caring for a dying man, not seeking glory." The light from the pool began to dim as dawn approached outside. Soon this sacred space would retreat back into whatever realm it belonged to, leaving Tommy's bones to join the collection on the cavern floor. The thought should have terrified him, but instead he felt a strange sort of peace. At least his death would have meaning. At least he would know the truth his grandfather had died seeking. But as that thought settled into his mind like the calm before a storm, Tommy realized something that made his blood run cold. The silver mare was right, there was no path back. But she hadn't said anything about his family, about what the compass's disappearance might mean for everyone he'd left behind. The drought, the dying herds, the balance between worlds that Elena had mentioned. His failure here wouldn't just cost him his life. It would doom everyone he loved to whatever catastrophe the hidden valley was meant to prevent. Tommy's blood turned to ice as the full scope of his failure crystallized. The drought wasn't just weather, it was a consequence. The dying cattle, the withering grasslands, the way even the hardiest ranchers spoke in hushed tones about the land forgetting how to live. All of it connected to this place, to the ancient compact his bloodline had failed to honor. "Balance," he whispered, Elena's earlier words echoing in his mind. "What happens if no one claims the compass? What happens to my family?" The silver mare's eyes blazed with something between approval and terrible satisfaction. "Now you begin to understand, young Clearwater. Your bloodline's debt was never about personal glory. It was about guardianship." Elena's weathered hand gripped his shoulder. "The silver herd maintains the boundary between worlds, boy. They keep the wild magic flowing through the land, ensure the rains come when they're needed, guide the seasons in their proper turn. But the compact is ancient. They need a human bloodline to anchor them to this realm. My grandfather." Failed to understand, the mayor cut him off. He saw power to be taken instead of responsibility to be shouldered, as did the rancher Mackenzie. Both thought they could claim our gifts without accepting our burden. Tommy scrambled to his feet, his legs shaking but holding. The compass lay between him and the pool, its light almost gone. "What burden? What do you need from me?" The silver stallion stepped closer, his presence like standing in the path of an avalanche. "One of your bloodline must remain, must learn our ways, speak for us in the councils of men, ensure the sacred places remain untouched. Your grandfather's generation broke the compact through greed. His son's generation weakened further through neglect." You are the last. But I'm 8 years old. The words burst out of Tommy like a dam breaking. I don't know anything about councils or sacred places or any of this. I just wanted to save Mackenzie. And that, the mayor said quietly, is why the compass chose you. Elena stood beside him now, her ancient face etched with sorrow. The Guardian doesn't need to be powerful, Tommy. They need to understand that some things matter more than personal desire. Your grandfather never learned that. But you've already proven it. How? You gave up your safety to nurse a dying stranger. You risked everything to honor a promise to a man who couldn't even remember his own name half the time. That's the heart the compact requires, not strength or cleverness, but the willingness to sacrifice for something larger than yourself. The dawn light was growing stronger through the cavern entrance. Tommy could feel the sacred space beginning to withdraw, reality reasserting itself like a tide pulling back from the shore. Soon the silver herd would fade back to whatever realm they called home, taking their secrets with them. And without a new guardian, the drought would deepen. The wild herds would continue to vanish. The delicate magic that kept the land alive would wither until nothing remained but dust and bones and the bitter taste of failed responsibility. Tommy thought of his father's rough hands, cracked from endless work trying to keep their cattle alive on dying grass. His mother's worried eyes as she watched the sky for rain clouds that never came. The way even old-timers like Mackenzie spoke of the land as if it was slipping away from them, becoming something strange and hostile. If I stay, Tommy said slowly, if I become this guardian, what happens to my family? Elena exchanged a long look with the silver mare. The compact requires sacrifice, the mayor admitted. But not necessarily the sacrifice your grandfather attempted. He tried to steal our power while clinging to his old life. That path leads only to death. There's another way, Elena said softly. Harder, but possible. The Guardian can maintain ties to the human world, but they can never fully belong to it again. You would spend seasons here, learning our ways, then return home changed. Your family would know you survived, but you would be different. Marked by magic they could never fully understand. Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs. And if I don't? If I let the compass die here? The drought deepens. The land continues to fail. Within 5 years, your father's ranch is dust. Within 10, this entire region becomes uninhabitable. Your bloodline escapes, but everyone else pays the price for your family's broken promises. The boy looked at the compass lying on the stone floor, its light reduced to barely a flicker. In that dying glow, he saw not just his own choice, but the weight of history, generations of his ancestors who had heard the call but failed to answer it properly. Mackenzie and his grandfather, both destroyed by their desire to claim power without accepting responsibility. But he also saw something else, the trust in Patch's eyes, the love in his parents' voices even when they were angry with him, the way Mackenzie had clutched his hand and called him son in his delirium. Some things were worth sacrificing for. Some debts could only be paid with everything you had. Tommy Clearwater, 8 years old and more frightened than he'd ever been in his life, stepped forward and picked up the compass. The moment his fingers closed around it, everything changed. The power that flooded through Tommy was unlike anything he could have imagined. It wasn't the gentle warmth of a fireplace or the comforting heat of summer sun. It was raw and ancient and vast as a thunderstorm pouring into his small frame until he thought he might shatter from the force of it. Every nerve ending blazed with sensation as the compass bonded with his bloodline, awakening gifts that had lain dormant for generations. But with the power came knowledge, flooding his 8-year-old mind with centuries of accumulated wisdom. He saw the hidden valley as it truly was, not just a cave with magical horses, but a nexus point where the wild magic of the earth converged. He understood the drought now, felt it like a wound in the land's flesh, spreading outward from places where the ancient compact had been broken. The silver herd weren't just guardians, they were living conduits, channeling the life force that kept the entire ecosystem in balance. Yes, the silver mare's voice resonated through him, but it was different now, not alien and imposing but harmonious, like finding the perfect chord. You see what we have been trying to protect? Tommy's legs gave out, but this time it wasn't from fear or despair. The sheer scope of what he'd inherited was staggering. He could feel every blade of dying grass for miles around, sense the water table dropping foot by foot, taste the desperation of cattle and wildlife alike as they searched for sustenance that grew scarcer each day. Elena knelt beside him, her weathered face creased with concern and something that might have been relief. "Easy, boy. The first joining is always overwhelming. Let it settle." "I can feel everything," Tommy gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The whole valley, the drought, the animals, it's all connected, isn't it?" "Everything is connected," the silver stallion confirmed. "That is the first lesson of guardianship. Your grandfather never understood this. He saw only what he could take, not what he was meant to tend." Gradually, Tommy felt the overwhelming flood of sensation begin to organize itself into something manageable. The compass in his hand had grown warm rather than burning, its light steady now instead of flickering. Around the pool, the silver herd watched him with something approaching approval, their alien hostility replaced by cautious acceptance. "What happens now?" Tommy asked, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. Elena smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features. "Now you learn. The compact isn't just about accepting power, it's about earning the wisdom to use it properly. Your grandfather tried to skip that part. Mackenzie thought courage alone would suffice. But you—" she studied his face intently. "You might actually survive the teaching." The silver mare stepped closer, her hooves still making no sound on the stone floor. "The learning will take seasons," she explained. "You must understand the deep currents that flow beneath the surface world. Learn to read the language the land speaks. Discover how to channel the wild magic without being consumed by it. Some of this must be done here, in the hidden places. But some can be done in your world, walking the boundaries between realms." "My family," Tommy said urgently. "I need to tell them I'm alive. They'll be searching." "They will find you," Elena assured him, changed but whole. "The teaching begins with a test of trust. You must return to them and live as a bridge between worlds. They will see the difference in you, but they must never know the full truth. That burden is yours alone to carry." Tommy felt a flutter of hope in his chest. "I can go home?" "For now," Elena said carefully. "But you'll be called back when the season turns. And each time you return here, you'll be less of the boy they remember and more of something else. The Guardian's path is lonely, Tommy. Make sure you understand that before you commit fully." The compass pulsed in his hand, and suddenly Tommy could see a shimmering pathway leading back toward the canyon entrance, different from the route they'd taken in, but clearly marked with the same otherworldly glow. Dawn was breaking outside, painting the cavern walls with golden light, but the sacred space wasn't withdrawing as he'd feared. Instead, it felt stable, anchored by his acceptance of the compact. "The immediate crisis has passed," the mayor explained. "Your choice has restored the connection that was severed when your grandfather died. The drought will begin to ease, though slowly. The herds will return to their traditional ranges, but vigilance is required. There are always those who would exploit the sacred places for profit." Tommy thought of Mackenzie, probably still recovering in the line shack, tormented by memories of a power he'd glimpsed but could never possess. "What about Sam? What do I tell him?" Elena's expression grew somber. "The truth will break him or heal him. That choice is his to make." Rising to his feet, Tommy felt the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders like a cloak meant for someone much older. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, something else was growing, a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged and what he was meant to do. The journey back through Devil's Canyon should have felt familiar, but everything had changed. Tommy rode patches along the shimmering path Elena had shown him, the compass warm in his pocket, and felt the land speaking to him in ways he'd never imagined possible. He could sense the underground streams that still carried water through the drought-stricken earth, feel the pulse of life in stunted grass that looked dead, but was merely waiting. The very stones seemed to whisper secrets about rain that would come and seasons that would turn again. But with each mile that brought him closer to home, the weight of what he couldn't tell his family pressed heavier on his chest. How do you explain to your parents that their 8-year-old son has accepted a supernatural compact? How do you look your mother in the eye knowing you'll be called away again when winter comes? The sun climbed higher as they emerged from the canyon, and Tommy could see riders in the distance, his father and 3 neighbors, their horses spread out in a search pattern. Even from half a mile away, he recognized the slump of exhaustion in their postures, the desperate way they scanned the horizon. They'd been looking all night. "Pa!" Tommy called out, urging Patches into a gallop. His father's head snapped up at the sound, and for a moment, John Clearwater sat frozen in his saddle as if he couldn't trust his own eyes. Then he was spurring his horse forward, closing the distance between them with reckless speed. "Tommy!" The word came out cracked and raw. "Son, where the hell have you been?" But as his father drew closer, Tommy saw the exact moment when John noticed something different. His father's weathered face went still, brown eyes narrowing as he took in details that didn't quite fit. The way Tommy sat straighter in his saddle, the new stillness in his young features, something indefinable that hadn't been there yesterday. "I got lost tracking a wounded horse," Tommy said carefully, the lie burning his throat. "Found shelter in a cave until morning." John Clearwater was no fool. He'd lived on this land for 30 years, knew every ridge and canyon for miles around. His gaze flicked to the canyon mouth behind Tommy, then back to his son's face. "That so? Funny thing about Devil's Canyon, ain't supposed to be any caves deep enough to shelter in." Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs, but the compass in his pocket pulsed with warmth, and somehow he found the words. "There's a lot about this country we don't know, Pa. Old places, hidden things." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, John nodded slowly. "Your mother's been sick with worry. We best get you home." They rode in uneasy quiet, the other searchers falling in around them with relief-brightened faces and questions Tommy deflected as best he could. But he felt his father's eyes on him constantly, studying him like a puzzle with missing pieces. Line Shack appeared ahead, and Tommy's stomach clenched. Mackenzie would still be inside, still recovering, still carrying the torment of his failed attempt to claim the silver herd's power. The conversation Tommy needed to have with the old rancher felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. "Sam's been asking for you," his father said quietly as they dismounted. "Been ranting about compasses and silver horses. Figured it was just fever talk, but now you're not sure," Tommy finished. John studied his son's face for a long moment. "No, boy. Now I'm not sure about a lot of things." Tommy pushed open the door to find Mackenzie sitting up in the narrow bunk, his color better, but his eyes haunted. The old rancher's gaze locked onto Tommy immediately, searching his face with desperate intensity. "You found it," Mackenzie said hoarsely. "The hidden valley. I can see it in your eyes, boy. You found what I couldn't." Tommy felt his father tense behind him, felt the weight of 2 generations of secrets pressing down like a physical force. In his pocket, the compass pulsed again, and he understood that this moment would determine not just Mackenzie's fate, but the shape of everything that followed. "I found the truth," Tommy said quietly. "The question is what you'll do with it." Mackenzie's weathered hands trembled as he reached toward the boy, then fell back to his lap. "The silver mare, did she speak to you? Did she tell you about the compact?" "She told me about guardianship," Tommy replied. "About sacrifice. About the difference between taking power and accepting responsibility." The old rancher's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked every one of his 63 years. "I thought I was worthy. Thought courage and determination would be enough. But standing there, looking into those ancient eyes, I realized I was just another greedy fool trying to steal something that was never meant to be stolen." Tommy stepped closer, feeling the weight of his new role settling around him like armor. "The choice is still yours, Sam. You can let this destroy you, or you can help me protect what needs protecting." Mackenzie's eyes widened as the full implications of Tommy's words sank in. "Help you protect?" His voice cracked. "Boy, you don't understand what you're saying." The compact isn't something you help with from the outside. It's a binding that changes everything about who you are. I know, Tommy said simply, and the quiet certainty in his voice made both men stare at him. I accepted it, Sam. Last night, in the hidden valley. The compass chose me, and I chose to answer. The silence that followed was deafening. John Clearwater's face had gone pale as desert bone, his hand unconsciously moving to grip the doorframe as if the world had tilted beneath his feet. Mackenzie sat frozen, his weathered features cycling through disbelief, horror, and something that might have been awe. "You're 8 years old," his father whispered finally. "Tommy, what have you done?" But before Tommy could answer, Mackenzie was struggling to his feet, ignoring the pain that still racked his battered body. "Show me," the old rancher demanded. "The compass. Show me what it looks like now." Tommy hesitated, glancing at his father's stricken face. But there was no going back now, no way to unsay what had been spoken. He pulled the compass from his pocket, and both men drew sharp breaths at the sight of it. The brass surface gleamed within a light, its needle pointing steadily toward something beyond magnetic north. Delicate engravings had appeared along its rim, symbols that seemed to shift and flow like living things. "Jesus," Mackenzie breathed, sinking back onto the bunk. "It's beautiful. When I held it, the damn thing felt like it was trying to burn through my hand. But for you," he shook his head wonderingly, "it's singing, isn't it? I can almost hear it from here." Tommy nodded, closing his fingers protectively around the compass. "The Silver Mare said you and Grandpa both tried to claim something that had to be freely given. The compact doesn't take guardians. It accepts volunteers." "Your grandfather," John said hoarsely, and Tommy turned to see his father's face crumpling with understanding and grief. "That's how he really died, isn't it? Not a riding accident." He tried to force his way into something he should have left alone. The land rejected him, Tommy confirmed gently, but it didn't have to be that way. If he'd understood what they really needed— "A bridge," Mackenzie interrupted, his eyes suddenly bright with comprehension. "Not a master or a thief, a bridge between worlds." He looked up at Tommy with something approaching reverence. "And you said yes." "The drought's already starting to break," Tommy said, feeling the truth of it in his bones. "I can sense the change coming. Rain within the week, grass returning to the high pastures before summer's end. But it won't hold without proper guardianship." John stepped closer to his son, his calloused hands hovering as if he wanted to embrace the boy, but wasn't sure he had the right anymore. "Tommy, what does this mean for us? For your mother and me?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Tommy felt the full weight of what he'd committed to settling around them all. This was the hardest part, not the magical responsibilities or the supernatural powers, but the simple human cost of becoming something more than mortal. "I'll still be your son," Tommy said carefully, "but I'll be called away sometimes. Seasons when I have to learn from Elena and the Silver Herd, times when the compact requires me to tend the sacred places. I'll come home changed each time, and eventually—" He swallowed hard. "Eventually I might change too much to fit in the regular world anymore." Mackenzie was studying them both with the intensity of a man watching history unfold. "The boy's right about the drought," he said suddenly. "I can feel it too. Something shifted in the air, the way the light falls. The land's waking up again." He fixed his gaze on Tommy. "But you'll need help. Someone who knows the country, who understands what you're up against." "Sam," Tommy said quietly, "what are you offering?" The old rancher's face hardened with resolve. "I tried to steal what wasn't mine and nearly got myself killed for the trouble. But maybe that was supposed to happen. Maybe I was meant to fail so I'd be here when you needed someone who'd learned the hard way about the cost of power." He struggled to his feet again, swaying slightly but determined. "I'm offering to be your worldly guardian, boy. Someone to watch your back while you're learning to navigate between realms." Tommy felt something ease in his chest, a loneliness he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The compass grew warm in his hand, and for a moment he could swear he heard the Silver Mare's approving whisper on the wind outside. "The compact accepts willing service," Tommy said formally, the words coming from knowledge older than his years. "Samuel Mackenzie, Will you stand as shield and sword for the guardian of the threshold?" Mackenzie dropped to one knee despite his injuries, his eyes bright with purpose for the first time since Tommy had found him bleeding in the canyon. "I will." Outside, thunder rumbled in a cloudless sky. The thunder grew louder, and suddenly the cabin walls began to shake. John Clearwater stumbled backward as dust rained from the rafters, his eyes wide with terror. "What in God's name?" Tommy's blood turned to ice as he felt the compass in his hand begin to burn. Not with the gentle warmth of acceptance, but with the searing heat of warning. Through the growing supernatural storm, he could hear something else, hoofbeats approaching at impossible speed, and underneath them, a sound like the earth itself screaming. "They're coming," he whispered, the knowledge flooding through him with crystal clarity. "The ones who killed Grandpa. They know what happened in the valley." Mackenzie struggled to his feet, his face grim. "How many?" "3 riders," Tommy said, his young voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "But they're not entirely human anymore, not after what they've done to themselves." The hoofbeats stopped just outside the cabin. In the sudden silence, Tommy could hear his father's ragged breathing, feel Mackenzie's barely controlled rage, sense something else, a darkness that pressed against the walls like hungry shadows seeking entry. Thomas Clearwater. The voice that spoke was cultured, refined, but carrying undertones that made Tommy's skin crawl. "We know you're in there, boy. We know what you've taken from us." Tommy stepped toward the door, but Mackenzie grabbed his arm. "Don't," the old rancher hissed. "I know that voice. Harrison Blackwood. He was with me when we first heard rumors about the silver herd 20 years ago. I thought he'd given up the search. But if he's here now—" "He never gave up," Tommy said quietly, understanding flooding through him. "He's been waiting, watching, learning from our failures." He looked at Mackenzie with ancient eyes in a child's face. "How far did he fall, Sam? What did he trade away for power?" Before Mackenzie could answer, the cabin door exploded inward. 3 figures stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and imposing, but wrong in ways that made the eye want to slide away. They might have been men once, but whatever they'd become had carved the humanity from their features, leaving something predatory and cold. Harrison Blackwood stepped forward, his pale eyes fixed on Tommy with hungry intensity. "There you are. The new guardian. Tell me, boy, do you have any idea what you've stumbled into?" Tommy felt the compass pulsing in his hand, its light visible even through his closed fist. "I know enough," he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I know you've been stealing pieces of the compact for decades, killing guardians, breaking the bonds that hold the sacred places together." Blackwood smiled, the expression terrible on his transformed features. "Clever child. Yes, we've learned to harvest what we need without accepting those tedious responsibilities. Why serve the land when you can simply take what serves you?" His gaze shifted to the compass. "And now you're going to give us the final piece, the keystone that will let us claim the silver herd's power permanently." "Never," Tommy said, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The fear was still there, but underneath it burned something fiercer, a protective fury that belonged not to an 8-year-old boy, but to something far older and more powerful. "Oh, but you will," Blackwood purred. "You see, we've learned from past mistakes. Your grandfather tried to fight us. Look how that ended. Mackenzie here thought courage would be enough. We left him bleeding in the canyon as a lesson. But you," his pale eyes glittered with malicious anticipation, "you care about people, your family, this pathetic old man who thinks he can protect you." One of Blackwood's companions raised his hand, and John Clearwater cried out as invisible force slammed him against the wall. Mackenzie lunged forward with a roar of rage, but the third figure gestured casually, sending the old rancher crashing to the floor. "Stop!" Tommy shouted, and power exploded outward from the compass like lightning. The cabin walls groaned under the force of it, and all 3 intruders staggered backward. But Blackwood recovered quickly, his smile widening. "Excellent. Now we're getting somewhere." He gestured again, and Tommy felt crushing weight descend on his shoulders, driving him to his knees. You have strength, boy, but no training, no understanding of what you're truly facing. Give us the compass willingly, and your family lives. Refuse, and we'll take it from your corpse. After we're finished with them. Tommy's vision blurred as the supernatural pressure increased. Through the pain, he could see his father struggling to breathe, Mackenzie trying desperately to crawl toward his rifle. The compass burned in his hand like a star, its light flickering as his strength failed. Then, cutting through the darkness pressing in around his mind, he heard it. The silver mare's voice, clear and strong. Now you understand the true test of guardianship. Will you break under pressure, or remember what you truly protect? Tommy's eyes snapped open, blazing with inner fire. I remember, he whispered, and rose to his feet as power beyond his years flooded through him. And you're about to learn why the compact chose me. The power that flooded through Tommy wasn't his own. It belonged to the land itself, flowing through him like water through a broken dam. The compass in his hand blazed white-hot, and suddenly the cabin filled with the sound of wind and thunder and something else, hoofbeats, hundreds of them, racing across dimensions to answer his call. Blackwood's confident smile faltered as the supernatural pressure he'd been exerting shattered like glass. Impossible, he snarled. You're just a child. You can't command that kind of... You're right, Tommy said, his voice carrying harmonics that belonged to deeper places, older voices. I can't command it, but I don't need to. He held up the compass, its light now blindingly bright. I'm not trying to control the power, Mr. Blackwood. I'm offering myself to it completely. The realization of what Tommy meant hit Mackenzie like a physical blow. No, the old rancher gasped, struggling to his feet despite his injuries. Boy, you don't understand what you're saying. If you give yourself over entirely... I'll cease to be Tommy Clearwater, Tommy finished calmly. I know, but they'll live. His young face was serene despite the terrible weight of his choice. My father will live, you'll live, and the compact will endure. Blackwood's pale eyes widened with genuine fear for the first time. You can't be serious. No guardian has ever attempted complete integration. The human mind can't survive that kind of transformation. Maybe, Tommy said, but you're about to find out. He closed his eyes and opened his heart completely to the power flowing through him. The compass dissolved into pure light that poured into his skin like liquid starfire. Tommy felt his individual consciousness beginning to fragment, pieces of his 8-year-old self scattering like leaves before the hurricane of ancient knowledge rushing to fill the space he'd created. For a terrifying moment he was lost, suspended between being Tommy and being something vast and unknowable. He could feel his father's anguished cry, Mackenzie's desperate shout, but they seemed to come from very far away. He was everywhere at once, flowing through underground rivers, growing with the grass, breathing with every wild mustang that had ever run free across these sacred lands. But just as he felt the last threads of his humanity beginning to snap, something caught him. A memory, his mother's voice singing him to sleep. The feel of Patch's warm neck under his small hands, the taste of his father's awful coffee shared on cold mornings. Simple things, human things, precious enough to anchor him even in the midst of transformation. Remember who you were, the silver mare's voice whispered through the chaos. You cannot guard what you do not love, and you cannot love what you have never been. Tommy opened his eyes, and they blazed with power that made Blackwood's companions stumble backward in terror. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of mountains and deep waters, but underneath it, unmistakably, was still the determination of a stubborn 8-year-old boy. You wanted the Guardian's power, Tommy said, stepping toward Blackwood. Let me show you what that really means. He raised his hand, and the stolen fragments of the compact that Blackwood and his companions had harvested over the decades began tearing themselves free. The 3 intruders screamed as decades of stolen power ripped away from them, leaving them suddenly, shockingly mortal again. The land rejects you, Tommy declared, and his words carried the weight of absolute law. You are cast out from the sacred places. The wild lands will know your scent and turn you away. You have 1 hour to leave this territory, and if you ever return, the earth itself will swallow you whole. Blackwood, suddenly looking like nothing more than an aging man in expensive clothes, stumbled toward the door. This isn't over, boy. There are others like us. Others who will face the same choice you just did, Tommy interrupted. Leave now, while you still can. The 3 men fled, their footsteps fading into the distance. In the silence that followed, Tommy swayed on his feet as the full cost of what he'd done hit him. The power was still there, flowing through him like a river. But he was no longer entirely the boy who had discovered Mac Kenzie bleeding in the canyon. Pieces of his innocence had been burned away in the transformation, replaced by knowledge too heavy for young shoulders to bear. His father reached him first, catching Tommy as his legs gave out. Son? Tommy, are you? Tommy looked up at John Clearwater's worried face and managed a weak smile. I'm still me, Pa. Changed, but still me. His voice was his own again, though edged now with new depths. I found a way to keep the best parts. Mac Kenzie knelt beside them, his weathered face creased with awe and sorrow. The sacrifice, he said quietly. You gave up your childhood to save us all. Tommy nodded, feeling the weight of premature wisdom settling around him like armor he'd never be able to remove. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. The rain began as a whisper against the broken cabin door, each drop carrying the promise of salvation for the drought-scorched land. Tommy remained cradled in his father's arms, feeling the strange dual nature of his existence settling into place like pieces of a puzzle he'd never asked to solve. He was still 8 years old, still small enough for his father to hold, but behind his eyes moved knowledge that belonged to centuries. The rain, John whispered, his voice thick with wonder and grief. It's really coming back. Tommy nodded against his father's shoulder, sensing the vast machinery of weather and season responding to the restored compact. It'll be a gentle return, he said softly. The land needs time to remember how to drink deeply. He could feel it all. Every stream beginning to swell, every root system preparing to accept the gift of moisture, every blade of grass stirring with renewed life. Mac Kenzie struggled to his feet, moving to the shattered doorway to watch the rain fall. 23 years, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. 23 years I've watched this country dying by degrees, and you've brought it back in a single night. He turned back to Tommy, his weathered face wet with something more than rain. But at what cost, boy? What did you have to give up? Tommy carefully extricated himself from his father's embrace, standing on unsteady legs. The compass was gone, its physical form dissolved, but he could feel its presence integrated into his very bones now. Childhood, he said simply, the luxury of not knowing, of believing adults would handle the dangerous things. He looked at both men with eyes that had seen too much too young. I can still play with Patches, still help Ma with chores, still get in trouble for tracking mud through the house. But I'll always know what's really at stake when the balance starts to tip. John reached out tentatively, touching his son's face as if to reassure himself the boy was still flesh and blood. Will you still need us? Still want to come home? The question broke Tommy's heart more thoroughly than all the supernatural terror that had come before. Pa, he said, his voice cracking with the emotional weight only an 8-year-old could carry. Being guardian doesn't make me less your son. If anything, it makes coming home more precious. He leaned into his father's calloused palm. Elena and the silver herd will teach me things I need to know, but you and Ma will teach me things I need to remember, like how to be human. Mac Kenzie cleared his throat roughly. Speaking of Elena, she's coming. I can hear them approaching, the whole herd by the sound of it. Tommy tilted his head, listening to sounds only the awakened could perceive. They're coming to witness, he confirmed, to formally acknowledge the new compact, and to... He hesitated, uncertain how to explain. To say goodbye to who I was. It's important, in the old ways. The hoofbeats grew closer, accompanied by a sound like distant bells and the whisper of wind through grass that had never known drought. Through the rain, silver shapes began materializing. First Elena, her horn catching light that had no earthly source, then the great stallion, then dozens of others, filling the clearing around the cabin with their ethereal presence. Elena approached the doorway, her ancient eyes reflecting both sorrow and pride. "It is done," she said, her words reaching all three humans. "The compact is restored, the balance renewed, but the price—" Her gaze fixed on Tommy with infinite gentleness. "Child of two worlds, are you at peace with what you have become?" Tommy stepped toward her, no longer afraid of the overwhelming presence that had once driven him to his knees. "I am," he said truthfully. "It hurts, knowing what I've lost. But it would have hurt worse to lose everything I was trying to protect." "Wisdom beyond your years," Elena observed. "This is both your strength and your burden now. You will walk between worlds, young guardian, carrying the needs of each to the other. When mortals forget their place in the greater web, you will remind them. When the wild places grow too distant from human hearts, you will build bridges." Mackenzie stepped forward, still moving carefully, but with renewed purpose. "And he won't walk alone," the old rancher declared. "I pledged myself as his worldly guardian. That still stands." The silver stallion turned his mighty head toward Mackenzie, studying him with eyes like stars. "Samuel Mackenzie," he said finally, "you sought to take by force what can only be given freely, but in failure you found wisdom. In defeat you discovered service. The compact accepts your pledge." John Clearwater looked between his transformed son and the legendary creatures surrounding their humble cabin, his face cycling through disbelief, fear, and finally, a kind of stunned acceptance. "What do I tell his mother?" he asked quietly. "How do I explain that our little boy has become something out of legend?" Tommy smiled then, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the 8-year-old who had discovered a wounded stranger in Devil's Canyon. "Tell her I'm still afraid of thunderstorms and I still hate lima beans," he said. "Tell her some things never change, even when everything does." Outside, the rain continued to fall on grateful earth. The rain had been falling for 3 hours when they finally made the journey home. Tommy rode Patches with careful attention to the pony's shorter stride, while his father and Mackenzie followed on foot, both men still processing the night's revelations. The silver herd had melted back into the spaces between worlds, but their presence lingered like starlight on water, visible if you knew how to look. The Clearwater Ranch appeared through the morning drizzle, like a painting coming into focus. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, and Tommy could see his mother's silhouette moving behind the window. His heart clenched with sudden, desperate longing for the simplicity he'd lost, for the boy who could run to his mother's arms without carrying the weight of worlds between his shoulders. "She's been up all night," John said quietly, recognizing the familiar signs of Margaret's worry, probably wearing a path in the kitchen floor. Tommy slipped down from Patch's back, his small hands automatically beginning the routine of unsaddling the pony. But his movements were different now, more deliberate, touched with an awareness that extended beyond the immediate task. He could sense the gladness in the earth beneath his feet as it drank the falling rain, feel the subtle shift in the air as drought-stressed plants began their slow recovery. "Tommy," his mother's voice carried across the yard, sharp with relief and lingering fear. Margaret Clearwater appeared on the porch, her brown hair escaping its pins, her apron twisted from hours of anxious movement. "Tommy, thank God." She stopped mid-sentence as her son turned toward her. Even across the distance, she could see something fundamental had changed. Tommy was still her little boy, still small and vulnerable in his mud-stained clothes, but there was something in his bearing now that spoke of burdens too heavy for 8-year-old shoulders. Tommy felt the moment of recognition pass between them like an electric current. His mother had always been able to read him better than anyone else, and now she was seeing the transformation written in every line of his face. For a terrifying instant, he wondered if she would still want him, still love the strange hybrid he'd become. Then Margaret was running across the muddy yard, gathering him into her arms with fierce desperation. "Oh, my baby," she whispered against his wet hair. "Whatever happened out there, whatever you've been through, you're home now. You're safe now." Tommy buried his face against her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scents of lavender soap and baking flour that meant safety and love and everything normal he'd feared losing. "Ma," he said, his voice muffled by her embrace, "I'm different now. I had to become something else to fix things, and I'm scared you won't—" Margaret said firmly, pulling back to cup his face in her hands. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "You listen to me, Thomas James Clearwater. I don't care if you've grown wings or started breathing fire. You're my son, and nothing in this world or any other will ever change that." John reached them then, placing a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. "Maggie, there are things you need to know about what Tommy's become, what he's agreed to—" "Later," she said, not taking her eyes off Tommy's face. "Right now, my boy needs breakfast and dry clothes and his mother's attention. The rest can wait." She searched Tommy's transformed gaze with the intuitive wisdom that had guided her through years of frontier hardship. "Can't it, sweetheart? The magical business will still be there after you've had some normalcy." Tommy nodded, feeling some of the terrible tension in his chest begin to ease. "Yes, ma'am. Elena says the real work starts slowly anyway. I need time to grow into what I've become." Margaret stood, keeping one hand on Tommy's shoulder, as if to anchor him to the ordinary world. She looked at Mackenzie, who had been standing quietly in the rain, his weathered face reflecting exhaustion and something like peace. "Samuel Mackenzie," she said, her voice carrying both gratitude and reproach. "You look like you've been through hell and back." "Something like that," Mackenzie admitted with a rueful smile. "But your boy pulled me out of it, Mrs. Clearwater. Saved my life and my soul, if I'm being honest about it." "Then you're welcome at our table for as long as you need," she said simply. "God knows this family understands second chances." As they walked toward the house together, the transformed boy, his protective parents, and the redeemed rancher, Tommy felt the dual nature of his new existence settling into place. He was still Tommy Clearwater, still loved and claimed by this small family. But he was also something more now, connected to forces and responsibilities that stretched far beyond their modest ranch. The rain continued to fall, washing the dust from the world and preparing it for rebirth. And in the warm kitchen that awaited them, ordinary life beckoned, coffee and eggs and the blessed routine of love expressed through simple acts of care. Some changes, Tommy realized, didn't have to mean loss. Sometimes they just meant growing large enough to hold more than you'd ever imagined possible. The new beginning. 6 months later, Tommy stood in the pasture watching patches roll in grass that grew thick and green in soil that remembered rain. The drought had broken completely by October, and now, in the gentle warmth of an early spring day, the land bore no trace of those terrible dry years. Wildflowers dotted the meadows in impossible profusion, and the creek ran clear and strong between banks lined with cottonwoods that whispered secrets only Tommy could fully understand. He was still 8 years old, still small for his age, but the way he carried himself had changed. There was a quiet confidence in his movements now, a sense of belonging that extended far beyond the boundaries of his family's ranch. When he walked the fence lines with his father, checking cattle and mending wire, he could feel the contentment of the earth itself, the deep satisfaction of a world in balance. "Tommy," Margaret's voice called across the yard. "Breakfast!" He grinned and ran toward the house, his boots splashing through puddles that would have been precious beyond measure just months ago. Some things, blessedly, remained exactly as they'd always been. His mother still burned the biscuits when she got distracted. His father still told the same terrible jokes while drinking coffee strong enough to float horseshoes, and Tommy still managed to track mud through the kitchen despite his best intentions. Mackenzie looked up from the breakfast table as Tommy burst through the door, and the old rancher's weathered face creased into a smile. "Morning, partner. Elena's been asking for you." Tommy nodded, accepting the glass of milk his mother pressed into his hands. "I know. I can feel her calling, but she can wait until after breakfast." He shot a sideways glance at Margaret. "Some things are more important than magic." "Smart boy," Margaret said approvingly, ruffling his hair as she passed. "Even guardian spirits need their eggs and bacon." Mackenzie had stayed through the winter, initially to help Tommy understand his new role, but increasingly simply because he'd become family. The old rancher had found peace in the ordinary rhythms of farm life, milking cows, mending harnesses, teaching Tommy the finer points of horsemanship. The desperate hunger that had driven him to seek the compact had been replaced by something quieter and more sustainable, the satisfaction of service freely given. "What does Elena want today?" John asked, settling into his chair with his coffee. "The spring gathering," Tommy replied around a mouthful of pancakes. "All the herds are coming together in the high meadow. It's been 3 years since the last one." He paused, considering how to explain concepts that had no easy translation into human words. "It's like a celebration and a business meeting and a family reunion all at once. They want me there to represent the human side of things." Margaret sat down across from him, her face showing the mixture of pride and worry that had become familiar over the past months. She'd adapted to her son's transformation with remarkable grace, but Tommy knew she still grieved for the uncomplicated childhood he'd lost. "How long will you be gone?" "Just overnight," Tommy assured her. "And Mackenzie's coming with me. Elena says it's important for both guardians to witness the gathering." "Both guardians," John repeated with a shake of his head. 6 months ago, if someone had told me my son would be discussing business meetings with magical horses, I'd have checked them for fever. Tommy laughed, the sound bright and entirely normal. "If someone had told me I'd be looking forward to going back to school next week, I'd have done the same thing." He made a face. "Miss Henderson says I'll be starting with advanced reading. Apparently having ancient wisdom doesn't excuse you from learning proper grammar." "Wisdom's no substitute for education," Margaret said firmly. "Guardian or not, you're still 8 years old, and 8-year-olds need school and friends and chances to just be children." It was an ongoing negotiation, this balance between Tommy's supernatural responsibilities and his very human needs. Elena had been surprisingly supportive of Margaret's insistence on normalcy, explaining that a guardian who lost touch with ordinary humanity would inevitably fail in his duties. So Tommy attended school, helped with chores, played with the neighbor children, and complained about bedtime just like any other boy his age. The magic was always there, thrumming quietly in the background of his consciousness, but it no longer threatened to overwhelm everything else. After breakfast, Tommy made his way to the old oak tree where he'd first encountered Elena. She materialized as he approached, her silver coat shimmering with reflected sunlight, her horn casting rainbows through the morning air. "Are you ready, young guardian?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Tommy reached up to stroke her neck, marveling as he always did at the electric warmth of her presence. "I'm ready," he said. "But Elena, after the gathering, can we just be quiet for a while? Sometimes I miss the simple conversations." Elena's laugh was like wind chimes and water over stone. "Wisdom and innocence," she observed fondly. "You hold them both so well, little one." "Yes, we can be quiet. Even ancient compacts need time to simply exist." As they prepared to leave for the high meadow, Tommy looked back at the ranch house where smoke still rose from the chimney and his parents watched from the porch. This was home, this place where love was expressed through ordinary gestures and where he could always return to remember who he'd been before the world grew larger. He was ready for whatever came next.